On today's show, they stopped him at the airport. The Bucs hired the guy who's been torching their defense to run their offense. Zac Robinson is in. Josh Grizzard is out, and the move might decide Baker Mayfield's future in Tampa. Let's talk about it. This is the Bucs Report. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find us online, bucsreport.com. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe or follow the Bucs Report on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, the Bucs made their pick for offensive coordinator. And you take a look at it, not ultimately who I think they hoped they were going to get, but ultimately it is the guy that they chose. Is it the right decision? Listen, we can talk about the fumbles that this team made big picture all of last season. And one of those I still think is somehow, some way, Todd Bowles is still at the helm of the Buccaneers as their head coach. Somehow Jason Licht is still the decision maker, and how I think that next season a lot will be determined. I think a lot will be determined is, are we going to see yet another OC the following season? Is Baker Mayfield the right QB for this team? And I got to believe that if the Bucs fall short next season, that it will finally be the end of Todd Bowles in Tampa. So let's just get into it here. First of all, talking about the swing and a miss. I'm talking about the Buccaneers striking out looking as they strike out on McDaniel. And he was kind of a polarizing guy, wasn't he? That, just doing the show, talking to some people about the Bucs, whether it's on Twitter or just in my day-to-day life. And, that McDaniels, he's an interesting character. It's not every day that you see a grown man wearing capri pants on the sideline of a football field. And those mic'd up videos, I think that was more for show, as it does appear that he is a good coach, whether it's an offensive coach, whether it be a head coach. It's interesting how outward appearances aren't always accurate. So let's talk about the swing and a miss looking by the Buccaneers, because the Bucs did swing for McDaniel and whiffed. And, well, that matters. So let's just start right here, because that is the headline. The Bucs wanted Mike McDaniel, right? They brought him into the building. They sold him the vision. Baker Mayfield, play calling freedom, stability, all of it. And in the end, he headed to the Chargers to team backup Jim Harbaugh. Now, look, this isn't just losing a candidate, if you ask me. This is losing the candidate. McDaniel was the guy fans could rally around. I really do believe it. I think that he could have been the guy to fix the offense, as that would have been his job. I guess we'll never know at the end of the day. I guess I will keep an eye on the Chargers, right, to see what they do. I understand not an apples for apples comparison, different players, different systems, but it'll be an interesting thing. But I think what they lost out on was the creative guy, the schematic edge guy, the guy you could squint at and say, right, this is how we unlock Baker's other level, right? I think that would have at least been the hunch. And it was an interesting season for Baker last year, right? That earlier in the season, the chance of MVP, well, those were short-lived and evaporated in a hurry as the Bucs failed to live up to expectations. So the Bucs they swung and missed on McDaniel. Instead, the Harbaugh family swoops in. Justin Herbert is sitting there, and McDaniel basically says, yeah, I'm good. Chargers it is. And, it's interesting when you talk about the Bucs and how different they were from, let's say, a handful of years ago, right up to 5 years ago. when Brady was here, time flies. And there were so many people that were just hungry to come here in any regard, players and coaches. And now we're kind of veering back into pre-Brady, where we're, not as good as we once were, right? I'm not trying to dunk on them, but I think that we could all agree on the fact that they're not the team that they were years ago. And it's harder to bring in players if there's not a perception that great days lie ahead. You got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Abuka, all these guys. There's parts of the puzzle that fit, but also parts that are just like unexplainable. Like, how is it possible that the Buccaneers missed the playoffs? How did they not win the NFC South? And how did the Panthers do that? There's a lot of questions. And I think for a guy like McDaniel, a lot of questions. Is that what, the team that I really want to hitch my star to, if you will? And here's the thing that stings. The Bucs weren't window shopping. This was the full court press. They were serious. They wanted McDaniel or Todd Monken to call plays. And that tells you everything you need to know about where this franchise is at and what it thinks where it is right now. They believe they're close. They believe they're competitive. And missing on McDaniel means you pivot, not rebuild. So that's the key. This wasn't desperation. This was ambition, and ambition just ran into reality, as there was quite a bit of buzz out there that the Buccaneers was going to be his next landing place. As it turns out, was not the case. So at the end of the day, I'm disappointed. Like maybe you heard from your parents. I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed. I'm not mad at the Buccaneers. I'm just disappointed that, you take a look at the leadership group. I know that they did make some changes, but at the end of the day, is the changes that they made good enough? I guess a lot will be determined on what they do at the draft, what kind of trades they make, those kind of things. But right now, heading into next season, it seems like a million miles away or a million months away. But hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on YouTube. How optimistic are you guys feeling about next season? Is the decision that they made at the OC, was that good enough? Tough questions for the Bucs to answer. That is for sure. So let's next pivot to Todd Bowles. Listen, I like to dunk on him all the time, that he's not the guy. How is this guy here? He just seems inept in a lot of different ways. I think that he knows the defense pretty well, but there's still the fine points of the game that he does not know. Clock management, the ability to go for it when I think the need calls for it. And ultimately the guy that, he has to wear it, right? He's the head coach. If he's going to wear it when they win, 3 NFC titles when he was at the helm, he can wear that. He's also going to have to wear the Bucs missing it, and how winning the NFC South was in his grasp and the Buccaneers' grasp. And it's interesting that names are starting to stand up and kind of prop up Todd Bowles here. Tony Dungy defending Todd Bowles matters more than fans want to admit. So let's shift gears here, because this one hit home for the Bucs fans. Tony Dungy comes out and basically says, calm down. Todd Bowles is doing just fine. And admittedly, people roll their eyes. I rolled my eyes when I read that. But listen, this isn't any former coach talking. This is the guy who dragged the franchise out of the mud. And just taking a look at who he is, Dungy knows exactly how fast patience disappears in this league, because it happened to him here. He built the culture. He built the defense, he built the credibility, and he still got fired because the offense stalled and people wanted the next step now. Sound familiar? As there, just like in all pro sports, but it holds especially true in the NFL, you get hired to get fired, right? That there's no waiting around, that if you are not the guy, it's on to the next guy. Because Dungy's point isn't that Bowles is perfect. It's that the standard has become ridiculous, that if you don't win the division every year, you're garbage. If you don't make a deep push into the playoffs, you're garbage, and you see that, the Bills changing coaches, that there's been quite a few coaching changes that are a bit questionable. You saw Tomlin step away, that even though your history, your resume speaks volumes, If you sidestep or take a marginal step back, they're calling for your head in a lot of ways. And only one team wins the Super Bowl every year. And I think that it's a bit ridiculous to think that if you don't win it every year, that you need to change the coach. And that is kind of, a pivot to what I talked about in segment 1. With that said, I don't think I understand where Dungy's coming from. However, I think that, and I hate to say this because it sounds like an interesting take, but when you take a look at Todd Bowles, he got lucky a couple of years. He got lucky that he was surrounded by other coaches that propped him up. He was lucky that he had players that made this team look better than they are. And at the end of the day, the team simply ran out of said luck. And it was even the beginning of this season, right? That they had all these late games that they had to come back to try to win. And that luck ran out. And ultimately, I think that the Buccaneers to start this season were a bit more of fool's gold than a legitimate contender, a paper tiger, if you will, because you saw later in the season when many of the players that were missing earlier in the season returned, they still could not get it done. Now, you could point to the defense. That is the glaring thing that sticks out to me, but it is where we're at. And it is a ridiculous standard in all pro sports, but it's the understanding that don't get too comfortable. There are outliers, like Tomlin, who was in Pittsburgh forever, but generally speaking, that is not the case. And like I say, only one team wins the ultimate prize every year. Everything else is degrees of failure. And if that's the measuring stick, then nobody is surviving very long. But with that said, this is pro sports. This is professional football, and the bar has been elevated in Tampa. And why is that? Because this team has now won 2 Super Bowls. There's quite a few teams out there that have never won a Super Bowl. So I think the expectation is there. I think that the Glazers, I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking, having Todd Bowles return, but, they know what they're doing. And they are big game hunters. If they like someone, see Bruce Arians, et cetera, they will seize the day. However, they're looking into it, I think, on former glory, because Bowles has gone to the playoffs, like I said, 3 straight years. And that does matter. It does. And Dungy saying that publicly gives cover to ownership and the front office to stay the course. You don't have to like it, but you should understand it. All right, next we'll talk about the Bucs chose continuity over chaos and how that decision defines 2026. So let's talk about that here next. The Bucs hired Zac Robinson because continuity with Baker Mayfield mattered more than chasing a splashy name. Again, we know what it's all about. It's a guy asking a girl to the prom, the prettiest girl in your high school, and she says no, that the guy has to pivot and go, I still want to go to the prom, but I guess I'm going to have to ask this person. I really wanted this one, but I'm going to have to go with that one. And, you can kind of try to sidestep and polish it any way you want. That is what the Buccaneers did. So let's start there because that's the headline here. The biggest takeaway is this. The Bucs chose Zac Robinson because keeping Baker Mayfield comfortable, confident, and moving forward mattered more than winning the offseason press conference. And I sincerely believe that. And look, this was not the original plan, right? We know that. Todd Bowles and Jason Light still had interviews lined up. Robinson literally went to the airport. He was about to board a plane, and then the Bucs pulled the plug and said, nope, don't leave. You're our guy. And what was it that they saw? And it's hard. And I don't want to dunk on Robinson here either because, well, the Falcons were not a really good team last year. And how good of a coach would he been on a better team? And I guess that the Buccaneers saw something in him that made him say, yeah. And not only that, the big names, the prettiest girls in the high school, well, they went to the prom with someone else. So here we are. And that tells you everything, right? That the Buccaneers, they're like, is he our guy? Is he our guy? Are we going to let him walk? This is our guy, I think, right? Get him on the phone. And this was about Baker. Zac Robinson coached Baker for 5 games with the Rams in 2022. That short stretch was huge for Mayfield's career. That's when Baker looked like an NFL quarterback again. And that relationship mattered. We've already seen this movie. Liam Cohen comes in, worked with Baker, offense stabilized, boom, head coaching job. Baker Mayfield has become a coach maker, and the Bucs leaned into that. And, Liam Cohen, man, he is a guy that I think the Buccaneers don't ever want to hear his name again, as he has also been involved in poaching some of the coaches on the Buccaneers and bringing them to Jacksonville. But that's rather here nor there. Robinson runs the same Rams-based concept that has been in this building since 24. So you take a look at it. Baker isn't learning a brand new language again. No reset, no square one. And I think that's massive for Baker heading into a contract year, and the Bucs need clarity on whether he is the long-term answer. This hire screams stability, not sexy, not loud, but intentional. So you take a look at it. I mean, it is what it is. They didn't ask me. They didn't ask my opinion. Well, who does Dan want as the offense coordinator? They didn't ask me that question. However, that is who the Bucs chose to hire. And I think that on paper, he looks good. I think that the rapport with Baker Mayfield is good. Let's hope he doesn't let us down. All right, so coming up here after the break, Zac Robinson already knows how to hurt the Bucs, and that's exactly why the Bucs hired him. Straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast, simulcast on the Bucs Minicast podcast feed, a part of the Fans First Sports Network. So we're talking all things Zac Robinson here in this episode, of course, because that is the big news. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, but also kind of exciting. The biggest takeaway here is that Robinson has absolutely torched this team for 2 straight years. The Falcons offense under Robinson shredded Todd Bowles' defense. We're talking nearly 30 points per game, over 440 yards per game. Kirk Cousins looked like an MVP candidate against Tampa Bay. And you think about Kirk Cousins, a guy that was washed, right? That has hop, skipped, and jumped a bit. Lost his way in Minnesota, went to Atlanta, was out, found a way to beat the Bucs. Isn't that interesting? 3 games, 3 wins, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. That is brutal. And Todd Bowles saw all of this close up, and I think that he maybe admired what he saw from afar. And that matters. Bowles didn't just study film, he lived it. So when Bowles said Robinson is a bright offensive mind, he's not guessing. He's got the scars to prove it. That the lowly Falcons, remember going into this season, they were going to be with Penix Jr., that this is going to be a team that's going to really push for the NFC South title. Not the case. Not the case. I still think that there are a lot of moving pieces that have taken place, changes in Atlanta that have taken place, and more that lie ahead, because Atlanta finished top 10 in total offense, top 5 in passing, top 10 in rushing. Pretty good, if you ask me. That balance is something the Bucs have chased forever, not just throwing it around, but being able to run when you have to. And yeah, people knock Robinson for the pistol stuff, but context matters. Cousins wasn't mobile. Penix came from a shotgun-heavy background. You adapt to the personnel that's coaching, right? That, this is the players that I have. This is the coach that I have. I'm going to need to be the one to adjust. Now, imagine that creativity with Baker's mobility, Bucky Irving's explosiveness, Chris Godwin's versatility, and Mike Evans if he's back. That's the big question mark as well. That I think that it is worthwhile, and ultimately time will tell. And that's what leads us to the next part of this show, is the hire could quietly reshape the Bucs roster, not just the playbook. Because this is kind of where it gets sneaky. The biggest takeaway here is that Zac Robinson doesn't just bring plays. He brings connections. And what am I talking about here? History tells us this happens all the time. Coaches bring in guys they trust, and the Bucs have some real needs. Tight ends jump off the page. Cade Otton is a free agent. Kyle Pitts just had his best year. Robinson knows exactly how to use them. And the price tag is real, but the fit is undeniable. Pitts absolutely cooked the Bucs this year. A running back is another one. Rachaad White is gone. Again, he was supposed to be the guy until there were, let's say, more viable options. Bucky Irving is the guy, but you need another back. And that makes questions as well. Offensive line depth matters too. Elijah Wilkinson started every game at right tackle for Atlanta last year. The Bucs learned the hard way you can never have enough linemen, as was evident when this team struggled. And don't sleep on the coaching staff. Quarterbacks coach is open. TJ Yates makes a lot of sense. Former QB, knows the system, knows Robinson, that continuity again. The hire opens doors. Whether the Bucs walk through that depends on the money, the timing, the roster priorities, but the paths are there right now. So to close out the show here, we're talking Zac Robinson is about urgency, culture, and getting players the ball, and that's exactly what this offense needs. So let's wrap up this pod this way. The biggest takeaway is that Zac Robinson brings urgency and enjoyment, and that's not coach speak. That's straight from the Sean McVay tree. That, I think, like I said, he was a victim of circumstance. He was a coach on the Atlanta Falcons, who were not a really good football team. And Robinson learned in Los Angeles when expectations were Super Bowl or bust, meetings mattered, practices mattered, everything had juice. And when you look at what he did in Atlanta, it wasn't perfect, but the growth was obvious. Bijan Robinson was everything. Kyle Pitts came alive again. Drake London produced even while missing games. And that's the traits to me that stands out. He finds a way to get the best players touches, not just, scheme plays, but consistent involvement. Now, put that mindset in Tampa. Baker needs rhythm. Godwin needs volume. Evans needs timing. Bucky Irving needs space. This offense doesn't need a reinvention. It needs refinement, I guess is what I'm going to say. It needs urgency. It needs confidence. And Zac Robinson checks most of the boxes. That's why the Bucs stopped him at the airport. But that's why the fifth OC in 5 years. And that's why this hire matters more than it might look at first glance. So that's where we're at right now. That is the new addition as this new team heading into next season is starting to take shape. And you had to know that there were going to be some heads that were going to roll when this team underperformed. And it doesn't matter that the last 3 seasons with Todd Bowles at the helm, that they wanted another OC, that they had Canales, they had Cohen, and they had Grizzard, and now another change in Robinson. So it is constantly in flux. And, you take a look at it, that Cohen seemed like a bit more of a mismatch to me before he came here than Grizzard did. And Grizzard is the one that is out of a job in Tampa. So it is interesting that sometimes things on paper, on spreadsheets, are not actuality. But we're hoping that the Buccaneers can take some steps forward. I think that one of the elephants in the room as well is Todd Bowles running the defense and why he does not want to relinquish the reins of the defense, running the defense. And I think that, he runs a good defense for the most part, but I think that if he had someone that ran that and he could just run the overall team, then I think that would also be advantageous for the Bucs because like I said, there is, I think that Bowles got a pass. I think that Jason Light got a pass. But I think that this is the season to make it right, to at least win the NFC South again. But it's not going to be that easy. As you know, that the other teams in the NFC South are going to do their damnedest to try to be better as well. You saw a big improvement, right, from Carolina. They won the whole NFC South, and just kind of speaks to volumes about how poor the NFC South is. Questions about New Orleans. What kind of changes do they need to make? Because I think that, it's been a team flailing since Drew Brees was there. The Falcons, what do they plan on doing as well? As is Penix the guy? What direction are they going to go in? There is a lot of moving pieces in this offseason for the Bucs. Of course, we know that the Super Bowl is on deck here as well. But the NFL season is wrapping up here shortly, and then I think that you will start to see more changes, not just with the Bucs, but around the league. That football, they put a bow on it, and we're already talking about next season. I pray as a Bucs fan, and as if you're watching or listening to this, I imagine that you're hoping for bigger and better things, right? That hopefully that Zac Robinson, hopefully that this team can find its way, because I think that on paper this team is there. We need to see evidence that this team is capable of doing great things yet again. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. Again, subscribe, follow on YouTube, leave some comments down below. Yum, yum, yum. It helps feed the algorithm. Also, follow me on the Bucs Minicast, a short form version where I keep you guys updated during the week or with Bucs news, part of the Fans First Sports Network. And I'll talk to you guys again next time.